remember the one question that just kept coming up was, how would we tie smart contracts to physical locations? How would we introduce location as a variable in the control flow of a smart contract? But I'm a bit of an accidental technologist. It wasn't a big part of my identity, and grew up outside. I wanted to be outside. I spent a few years as a cycling tour guide. I didn't want to live in the computer world. I remember one task I had was to write an internal memo on how DPRK evaded maritime sanctions to fund their nuclear weapons program. That's the way Russia is evading a lot of the sanctions that are put on them. Yeah, this need to create credible or durable claims about where things are happening, that's a problem that is a really challenging problem to solve. It's not an easy problem. So I don't know what we're going to think of. And this is the stuff that I'm most excited about. Once you set the creative energy of the Ethereum ecosystem on a problem and open up minds to what's possible with a new piece of technology, like very quickly, really cool things can happen.
Hey, John, it's really great to connect and have you here.
Likewise, McKeegan, that's great to meet you.
Likewise. So this is always my first question, but it feels particularly important in this conversation. Where are you from and where are you based?
It feels particularly relevant because even though we're children of the internet and our community is, the Kernel community especially, is first and foremost or primarily an online one, a lot of my work revolves around place and have a very strong sense of place that has informed a lot of my work and a lot of how I relate to the world. So I grew up in Colorado, in the suburb of Denver, a town called Golden. The house I grew up in is right on the edge of the very first mountain in the Rocky Mountains. It's one of those things as a child, it helped me get really sharp with cardinal directions really quickly, because I don't know if you've ever been to Denver, but the mountains are to the west. So you develop this intuitive awareness of the cardinal directions and the way the earth turns and all this. But being so close to the mountains, I got to go outside almost every weekend with my family, or snowboarding and skiing, or canoeing down rivers, or hiking, backpacking. And I think that connection to nature and that connection to the wilderness, that has stuck with me, and I think has come to inform a lot of what I do in ways that I still don't really understand. I currently am based in London in the UK, which is really different. It's almost just striking, because in London, the physical topography isn't quite as pronounced, but there's still a really deeply embodied sense of place and also time. Obviously, in Colorado, you have the sense of geologic time, but in London, I live in Angel, and it's so steeped in history, and it's even a relatively new neighborhood in the city. And I think my street was built in 1860 or 70 or something. And I can wander down the road and end up down in the city where there's a Roman wall next to a church built after the Great Fire. And then these sort of layers and layers of human history that also gives me a really endless curiosity into the sense of place and what's going on around me, even though it's not because of the mountains and the forests and the rivers and the lakes. And it's very different, but equal depth of beauty, I'd say.
Oh, I love that. How did your connection with place, how did it form your work, your professional journey?
So growing up in the wilderness, I learned how to read maps very young. It's actually not far from my house, the USGS, US Geological Survey headquarters. And we would go into this huge map room and pick out the 7.5 minute quadrangle topographic maps for the mountain basins we were going to go hike up. I got early familiarity with cartography and looking at a symbolic representation of space while also standing in the space and quickly being able to translate in my mind between, I see a bunch of close together contour lines here and there's a cliff right there. I can start to see that relationship. And yeah, the interest in maps, and then developed into an intellectual interest. When I was in my undergrad, I took a couple of classes on GIS and remote sensing. That's geographic information systems. So essentially software tools for analyzing mapping data and making maps, and developing better understanding of patterns in the physical world based on mapping data. And remote sensing is even a layer before that, taking photographs of the Earth and using that as data inputs for studying physical processes and urban processes. And it is rooted in that intuition from growing up with maps and then starting to actually pull back the curtains and say, how are these made? What can we learn about the world by using maps and mapping data? And that's really the thread that's stitched together my whole career. It's funny because I've been involved with Web3 now for about 7 years, but geography is really that's my career. I've been working with geographic concepts since my early 20s, really.
I'm curious, what brought you into Web3? Was it like a function of there's no location primitive here, and this is a really important element to
No way. No way.
centralized web? Because one of the things I love coming back to cartography, the opening for the Astral introduction is that humans are map makers, rooted in this lived experience that you have had with maps, and then translating that into this decentralized internet that has lacked this important connection to a physical space. We can get into that. The question, how'd you get into Web3?
I wish I could say I saw a gap and I was this deep intuitive insight and I could, no, it was a mate of mine telling me I should buy Bitcoin in 2017. I'd heard about it a few years prior, but I'm a bit of an accidental technologist. It wasn't a big part of my identity, and I grew up outside. I wanted to be outside. I spent a few years as a cycling tour guide. I didn't want to live in the computer world. I did find it very compelling. But anyway, a friend of mine started telling me about how Bitcoin was going to the moon and I should buy some. And I, of course, didn't know the first thing about it. And I must have made an account on Coinbase and put in $200 or something like that, and which was about the amount of money I had to spend on it at the time. And that, of course, tipped me down the rabbit hole of this is a different type of money. What is money? How does it work? What's going on under the hood? Really quickly came across Ethereum and cut past this sort of alternative form of digital currency is interesting, but I could see I was also just starting to learn how to code at the time and learning about what happens under the hood with computing, and sort of just intuitively thought, man, this seems like there's something really interesting here. It's really hard to cut through the noise. A lot of people then as now talking about things they don't really understand, and I didn't really know how to distinguish between them. That was the start of it. And I think the context is also important. I was working at an international NGO. I was a data scientist analyzing shipping patterns and trying to understand the economic costs of maritime piracy in the Western Indian Ocean region by looking at how ships were rerouting around more dangerous areas or speeding up through it, and figuring out how much more the industry was spending on fuel oil and the emissions impact and all this. But I was hanging out with a bunch of PhD level political scientists, people in peace and security. And I remember one task I had was to write an internal memo on how DPRK evaded maritime sanctions to fund their nuclear weapons program. And they take these ships and they sell the shell companies that own them and do some bureaucratic switcheroo of different flag state, rename it, paint it. But when it comes down to actually load on the coal or oil, they just turn off their AIS transceivers, which is the positioning system for commercial shipping, internationally mandated, and they just turn off, truck right into the port, load up, come back out, and pop back up on the map a couple of days later. As I was really starting to get washed over with this verifiability narrative, I was just like, man, this is crazy. There's got to be a better way to do this. And that, plus my background in geospatial and my interest in location-based apps and location-based services, all throughout my experience, slowly lowering myself into the crypto rabbit hole. I've always been asking, how does this tie to location? How does this tie to geospatial? Never had really satisfying answers, but lots and lots of questions.
How did that journey begin when you were starting to piece together these, there's got to be a better way to avoid a situation where all you have to do is switch something off and you can completely disappear from the physical world, and this opportunity to verify where something is, what were the questions you were asking? What did you begin to look at? What were the pieces you were starting to draw together?
Pretty soon after I left the NGO, I moved to London for a master's course at UCL, and a course called Spatial Data Science and Visualization. And that was going really deep on the full breadth and depth of geospatial data technologies, which you can broadly think of as the collection, analysis, storage, and visualization of maps and mapping data. That's how I frame it. And so that was me going deep on that particular set of technologies. And then nights and weekends, I was teaching London-based graduate students in computer science and machine learning about how smart contracts work and how to build decentralized applications. Started out obviously learning a lot, and then pivoted into being the technical director for the UK's largest student blockchain organization. And so it was those two things. You can't switch your mind and switch to smart contracts and say, okay, I'm forgetting everything I know about maps.
Yeah.
Naturally, everything was so close to hand. I remember the one question that just kept coming up was, how would we tie smart contracts to physical locations? How would we introduce location as a variable in the control flow of a smart contract? Require the user to be in Paris in order to use the smart contract. Use the distance between the person and somewhere as a numerical variable to say compute an exchange rate or apply some sort of tax or something. All sorts of different interesting things you can introduce when you bring in this notion of where the user is. At the time, like now, very few people were talking about it. I remember I was really inspired by this one project, which is called Foam. They're the OG Web3 geospatial team. They did an ICO in 2017, which I actually was involved in. It was a little kind of feather in my cap as far as being around early on. They were working on a DPIN network where you install these physical nodes, usually in an urban space or a port or something, and devices could connect to those and triangulate where they are. And they've got cryptographic economic assurances that it's true. So really pioneering work, but that was just a sort of early point towards one of the big needs that I ended up seeing as a key enabling bit of technology for answering that question of how do you tie smart contract behavior to where people are. And that's proof of location systems, right? The same problem that we've got with the AIS issue with sanctions evasion, which by the way is still happening. That's the way Russia is evading a lot of the sanctions that are put on them. Yeah, this need to create credible or durable claims about where things are happening, that's a problem that is a really challenging problem to solve. It's not an easy problem. Foam was working on it. A few others have been working on it. That was one of the pieces that I was looking at, but I also recognized that was just one piece of the puzzle for this location-based smart contracts question. So I also did a little bit of work trying to build a on-chain geofencing API or a geofencing contract, where it would take a user location, check it against a reference polygon. If it was inside the polygon, it would allow the smart contract logic to progress. I wrote a really basic prototype implementation of that in 2019 at ETH Paris. And the last 6 years of Astral has basically been a story of backfilling and saying, all right, how would we make each piece of that actually stand up? And how do you make it scalable? How do you make it credible? How is it just not a sort of whacked together in a hacky way?
I think it's a really interesting pursuit, the proof of location systems that you've been exploring, and in partnership with a professor at the University of Maryland. And I like the way that you talked about it on a recent Twitter thread about all these different pieces that are used in order to verify location, to prove location. In and of themselves, as an isolated metric, aren't going to be that beneficial. But when taken together, you compare it to multi-factor authentication, which I think is really interesting. And I wonder if you could talk about that in relationship to where Astral is now and how things have progressed since 2019 when you wrote that first basic version.
You summarized it well. For the last 7 years, Astral has mostly been a research project. It really took shape in the Genesis block of Kernel. We created this group, the Web3 Spatial Working Group, and really cool group of fellows joined in, and we ended up actually prototyping what we think is the first on-chain sustainability linked bond, where we tied the interest rate of a bond implemented in Solidity to air quality metrics from satellite imagery of London. It was like a municipal bond where the interest rate was tied to environmental factors. Since then, we've gotten a number of different grants to do research on different dimensions or opportunities in this Web3 geospatial world, which are much, much more expensive than what Astral is working on right now. But in the last year and a half or so, we've zeroed in on a couple of key pieces of enabling technology that we think will enable us to set up location-based services for the decentralized web. The story of how we figured this out is a story of trial and error, prototyping probably about a dozen different location-based decentralized applications in transport and logistics, local currencies, gaming, designing some dating services, all those kinds of things that we kept bumping into these same problems, even though these were really different user experiences and different apps. They all had a common set of needs, and that's what we've zeroed in on and are focusing on now. In a nutshell, over the last year, I've been working with the University of Maryland, Professor Taylor Onchain there at the Geographical Sciences Department. I met him because he picked up some work that I had done with the Kernel crowd on storing satellite imagery on IPFS, funded by the Filecoin Foundation and for the decentralized web. And about a year ago, he redirected some of his work towards thinking about proof of location systems. Anyway, it's all a bit of a roundabout exposition to say, I think of the location-based services for the decentralized web as having a few key components. One of them is a Web3 friendly format for geospatial data. And that comes in the form of a location protocol, which is an open standard, open specification for structuring and signing geospatial data records. So we've built the version 0 on the Ethereum attestation service, and anybody on their phone or computer can create a location attestation, which is a geographic feature or record wrapped up in an EAS attestation and signed with their Ethereum private keys. I think of this as an atomic record in a universal geospatial database. So it will often represent the location of a user, but it could also be a trail, the boundaries of some park or some voting area. It's deliberately very versatile and unopinionated. It's like one of these baseline new primitives. In the case that that represents the location of an event, I am here, I want an Uber. I'm here, I'm looking for a date. I'm here, I want to claim this Pokemon Go NFT, whatever. For a number of reasons, it's important that the verifier, whoever's receiving that claim, has a way to actually check to make sure it's true, right? And this is the problem Foam was trying to solve. There's another one called Witness Chain, another proof of location system. These are different strategies for making a credible claim about the location of an event. The theory or the thesis that we've developed with the UMD team is that one proof of location system producing evidence about an event is useful, but it's really when you stack evidence from different location proof systems on top of each other, and each of them corroborate that claim and come to the same conclusion. That's when we're going to get into actually building durable claims about where things are happening. We've identified a number of location proof strategies, which are the general ways proof of location systems can be set up. So you could have something like a network machine strategy like Foam or Witness Chain has, where they're triangulating the location based on measuring signals traveling through space. You could have near field machine strategies where you're scanning an NFC chip or connecting to Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. You could have social strategies where there are peer attestations saying, hey, we're all here together, we're all checking in together. Authority-based strategies where you go to a hackathon and an event checker checks you in, a ticket checker checks you in. We've been working through this, developing a framework for categorizing these different strategies, and now we're moving into developing a location-proof plugins library. So the location-proof plugins library is an open source library of plugins that you can integrate into software that create these pieces of evidence from different proof of location systems and attach them to location attestations. And we're now also working on a verification service that processes and analyzes this evidence pack that corroborates the claim and produces a signed location proof. A big part of our work now is trying to figure out how to make this useful and usable and simplify that process so that as a developer, you don't necessarily need to worry about, oh man, I've got all these complexities of working with these different proof of location systems. You can abstract that under the hood. So what we're aiming for is developing combinations or templates, patterns of different location proof plugins that when taken together create location proofs that are useful for different contexts. So one use case might be figuring out the location of nodes on a network. Where is this validator node located? Where is this data center? Is it GDPR compliant? Is it inside of this country? Is the Ethereum network geographically decentralized, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now thinking about ways to measure that. But a totally different use case might be, I want to be able to check whether or not people were present at a talk at DevCon. And we've set up some Bluetooth devices around, and there's some handshake exchange of pins, and these different sorts of patterns are recognizing the fact that there's no one size fits all, because this is such a ubiquitous challenge, and that there's a wide range of use cases where verifiable location data is useful. We didn't want to come in with one answer. You say, hey, there are a whole bunch of different answers. These answers are strongest when they're taken in combination with each other. Let's open up and build this whole toolkit and then figure out what the best combinations are for each individual use case, and ultimately let it be up to the developers and to the people receiving and verifying the location proofs to decide for them if they think that's a credible proof.
Cool. That's really exciting. What are the responses that you're getting from would-be app developers who are interested, who have a problem or don't even know that they have this problem, but see the benefit in being able to verify location using a plugin system like this? What are the different responses like across these different case studies, just given how extensible it is?
So they're mixed. Some people are really excited and just out of the box are like, this is cool. I can think of ways I would use this. I think it's the Ethereum ecosystem and blockchain aficionados generally are very skeptical and very security minded, which is good. I think that's part of the reason why blockchains are so durable, because they take this real kind of security led approach to building them. It's a pragmatic approach, right? We're not saying we need a 100% unassailable location proof that a nation state actor couldn't forge for every single use case. There's a whole range of use cases. A lot of times a self claim is enough, or one person that has an ENS name saying, yeah, they were there. Okay, fine. It's easy to forge, but that's okay for some use case. Some people say, yeah, no, I don't know. I don't really see the use cases. I don't get it. And then I point out most of the apps that I use every day that make my life better are location-based apps. They're the ones that help me connect more skillfully with what's around me, help me find good places to go on hikes or running, or meet people near me, find nice cafes near me. And that usually then ticks when I list off Uber, Tinder, Airbnb, Google Maps, Netflix, Amazon. These are all location-based apps in one form or another. And then a very common, very legitimate response is, but what about privacy? What about user privacy? And it's been front of mind since the beginning. It's, again, there's no one size fits all answer to user privacy. It's more important than almost anything else, right? Like me sharing where I live on a public blockchain is a bad idea. So we're building with a privacy first mindset, and there are a couple of ways we're doing that. One is EAS out of the box has some really cool privacy affordances. The first is that you can register EAS location attestations on chain, or you can sign them and hold them off chain, and they never go anywhere near a blockchain. So one way we're thinking about this is designing the location proof plugins library and the verification tools we have to work equally well on a centralized server, receiving encrypted communications from an end user's device. It never goes on a public IPFS network. It never goes on Arweave. It never goes on a blockchain. You can verify and then do what you will with it. So it's a bit more of a pragmatic hybrid architecture than just thinking everything needs to be on a decentralized public blockchain. Another thing we're real excited about, but as you might imagine is a little trickier, is zero knowledge location proofs. Creating zero knowledge proofs that verify that we had credible evidence that the user was inside of this polygon or bounding box. We're not going to tell you exactly where, we're not going to tell you exactly when, but we've got a level 3 location proof inside this area, and then share that publicly. And that could be enough for some use cases, or maybe that's enough to match with the local driver. And then you have a peer-to-peer exchange of exactly where the user is just with that driver to pick you up. By no means do we have all the answers, but it's definitely something we're thinking about. And it's a tricky thing because when you're building tools, people will use the tools how they use them. So we're trying to really lead with taking a user-centric, privacy-forward mindset in the way we're creating the SDKs that we're developing, the examples we're sharing, making privacy a first-class citizen in the Astral ecosystem.
Cool. It's funny, the lower you go in the stack, the closer you get to creating a primitive, the more opportunity and the more complexity you uncover. And thinking about something like privacy in the context of where somebody is, it's hard to crack. There is at some midpoint, as you're describing, I like the Uber example, and being able to use ZK proofs to get close enough so that you're adding some layer of security in there while having that layer of verification. Cool. So what's the vision for Astral? Let's say in the next, this has been your baby for a long time. Let's say 3 months and then 3 years.
In 3 months, I want to have apps being built with Astral. What we have live now is the location protocol is designed, and we're publishing the specification through the Open Geospatial Consortium, which is the main standards body for the geospatial web community. So we're taking this open, unopinionated specification for that. That's a necessary prerequisite. It kind of solves a collective problem rather than individual problems, and the individuals are solving those problems themselves. So that hasn't been compelling enough to get people building with us yet. I think the location proof plugins library will. So that's what's coming out here in the next couple of months. We're going to be launching our first few plugins, and I think it's looking like some sort of verification service to simplify the use of location proofs. And then bringing out a couple of recommended location proof recipe cards. So recommended combinations of location proof plugins that together are useful for different use cases. And it's a little bit of an out of the box way of stacking them to simplify the use. So I'd love to have pilot app builders building with us in 3 months. We also have been working on a geoprocessing service, essentially the Web3 geofencing API. And I don't think that will be ready in the next few months, but we've been building some prototypes on EigenLayer. And once you have location proofs, then you can get into, all right, we're going to check if this location proof is inside of this geographic area. Then we're going to issue an attestation. Suddenly you can have location-based services connected to DeFi, location-based finance, lo-fi. You can build games, you can build that's the sort of heart of the infrastructure we want to build. That's the full vision, having full featured location-based services for the decentralized web. In 3 years, if this all goes beyond my wildest dreams, I think we'll have really useful user-centric location-based apps that are taking advantages of some of the unique value propositions and design features that the decentralized web affords, right? You've got this web without borders. I have my universal identity across blockchains. If you start to think about, wow, I can look up all the people around me that hold this NFT, or all of my Farcaster followers that are at this particular event, and then I can connect with them and meet with people around me. I think reimagining some of these ride sharing or bike sharing schemes, thinking about a ride sharing protocol rather than a ride sharing platform where you can have the entire system intermediated by this protocol rather than a for-profit company that maybe isn't always looking out for the users in the best ways. I think probably more than anything, just like with DeFi, some interesting things came along that are basically recreating what's already possible, but something like Uniswap, that was so hard to foresee at the outset of Ethereum. And now in retrospect, it's so obvious. And that was more sophisticated smart contract enabled application that's built on interoperable primitives, these ERC20 tokens. So I don't know what we're going to think of. And this is the stuff that I'm most excited about, is once you set the creative energy of the Ethereum ecosystem on a problem and open up minds to what's possible with a new piece of technology, like very quickly, really cool things can happen. I'm really excited about local and community currencies, or currencies that are spent in geographic areas. And as you move away from them, the value decays, and interesting location-based governance questions like location-weighted quadratic funding, where my vote for a local regenerative project is more valuable because I actually live here than someone sitting on a computer in another country. These sorts of things, who knows what we're going to think of, right?
Yeah. Oh, I really like that. That's cool. I think my last question here is more kernel focused. You mentioned you've been around kernel since the beginning, and I'm curious how kernel first came on your radar.
I think it was summer of 2020. So it was lockdown, or maybe we were just coming out of the first lockdown, and everybody's at their computer all day, at least in the Web3 ecosystem, because there's nothing else to do. The bull market was getting rolling, and I can't remember how I found out about it, but I got my application in just before the deadline. I turned it around in a couple hours, and I really lucked out on it. And I was accepted, and I remember the first 2 chapters of the Kernel book came through, and I opened them up. I was on a walk and I started reading it, and I just stopped. I was just reading those first 2 essays, and I was just floored by, it felt like there was finally a place where there was going to be something that actually reflected the sort of intellectual depth or the philosophical depth of what I think is happening in Web3. And the thing that most floored me was when I actually joined the program and met the other people. The quality of the fellows was even higher than the quality of the writing and the ideas. And so it just very quickly looped me in, roped me in. I remember the first week having calls with a bunch of people and getting so excited, and talking to Andy and Vivek, and just feeling, okay, this is a place to build. This is a place to actually move thoughtfully and build things that are worth building, and not just barrel forward without thinking it through. And that was 5 years ago. So thinking it through is definitely the name of the game. And I'm definitely now, with the encouragement of Vivek, pushing myself to, okay, this sort of reflective, introspective, research-driven time has been invaluable. And now, after going and figuring something out, stopping, stepping back, subtract, step back, subtract, step back, subtract. Now it's like, all right, let's build this, let's get this out there. Let's get people working with it. It's not going to be perfect, but we've done our due diligence. I think we've done what we need to do to build this in the spirit that I want to build it. So Kernel has been absolutely central to the story, and I think it will remain central to it. It's an exciting time. It's time to do the thing.
Cool. Feels like a lovely spot to end.